Well, hey y'all. Today I am making what's called carne con chile or carne enchilada, whichever one you want to call it. Depends on what area of Mexico that you're in, what they're going to call it. But it's pretty much the exact same thing. And the recipe somewhat varies. Obviously, just like here in the United States, recipes for one dish will vary from the exact same dish name. In another area of the United States, it's a little bit different in different parts of Mexico. But this is the way that I learned how to make it. It is a steak with salsa, and we're about to get into this. It's typically a little bit more expensive because it uses steak, and I use a thinly cut steak, which can tend to be a little bit more expensive. But it's my son's birthday, so here we go. Here on my counter, I have the steak already cut up. You can use any kind of steak. This is, you can see, it's very, very thinly cut. I cut it into thin strips, which is that is the gist of it, what you're going to do with it to cut it. As far as which kind of steak, take your pick, whatever that you prefer, honestly. I have actually used regular steaks that are for the grill, and then of course I went through quite a long process to be able to cut it into the thin strips, but I have found out that this obviously takes a lot less time. It may have taken me as much as 5 to 10 minutes to get this here, with everything here, is about 4.5 pounds of meat. It didn't take all that long because it's already cut thinly. So if you can afford it, absolutely get it the thinner cut steak. Also, like for example at Walmart or something like that, it will typically be called Milanesa, which of course, if you ever need to know what I'm using, any of the ingredients, it will be in the description of the video. So here we're going to get this into the frying pan and we're going to get going. I have my pan. It is set to about a medium low heat. You don't want it to be to low. It's definitely not all the way to medium, but you want it to be on a medium-low heat because you want this steak to cook very slowly. If you try to do it too quickly, it will turn out tough, and obviously you want it tender. I'm going to add a little bit of oil to the pan, probably maybe a little bit more just because of the fact that it is a decent amount of steak. I mean, 4.5 pounds is nothing to sneeze at. I've let that oil begin to heat up ever so slightly. Then I'm going to add in the steak. And then as you go, you're going to want to start to kind of separate it little by little, because obviously the longer that it stays together is the longer that it's going to take to cook. And if I had the time, I would have separated them by hand happily, but it's already almost 7 o'clock. So it's probably going to be late when we eat dinner tonight, but that's all right. Also, the other thing I was going to mention is the fact that you can see that we've got some of this. It's got quite a bit of fat. It doesn't really matter because you've got that oil in the pan. Absolutely, you don't necessarily need this. If you find something that's a little bit more lean, more like this, absolutely. You do whatever you can find and that you believe that you will enjoy. I'm going to add just a teeny little bit more oil. It looks like I probably need just a little bit, a little good-sized drizzle. And once it gets kind of a little bit more coated, then we are going to add some garlic and some salt. When I first learned how to do this, we added garlic salt, but because I now use pink Himalayan salt, I use them separately, but you get the gist. You want the garlic and the salt, whether you do it together or whether you do it separately. Here we go with the garlic. This is kind of to taste. If you want to start a little bit light, feel free to, because there will be a teeny little bit of garlic also in the salsa that's going to go in here. So you do you. If you don't like a lot of garlic, obviously go light. And we're just going to kind of let this begin to brown. I'm going to keep on stirring it, breaking up the meat as it goes. And it's going to be a while. I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to take a little while for this meat to brown, and then especially it's going to be letting loose some of the juices. So it takes a while, but it's 100% worth it when you end up with that meat being nice and tender. I just turned the video back on for just a minute. You can see that quite a bit, not all obviously, but most of this meat has been separated. I'll see as I'm stirring it here and there, I'll see pieces that are still stuck together, but most of it has been separated through the process. Of course, as you can see here, there's plenty of water or juices or whatever you want to call it that have been let out from the meat. I promise you, as much as you may want to turn up the heat so that it will evaporate that water, the juices more quickly, don't. I've done that and I regretted it later because that was when the meat was tough. So I will just let you know it's going to be a longer process than some other things, but it is well worth that time. So just leave it. It will eventually get there, eventually. And I'll be back once this is pretty well ready to go, once the meat is ready to come out of the pot. Long story, and I will get there in a minute. But in the meantime, we can start getting the stuff ready for the salsa. The next step in this process is to start up with the salsa. You will need first and foremost Guajillo chili peppers, Guajillo chiles, whatever that you want to call it. These, for me at least, are sold at my local grocery store. You don't necessarily have to go to any Hispanic food stores. These, depending on the amount of heat that you're going to want, I would highly recommend try to get out as many of the seeds, but you don't necessarily have to get rid of the veins unless you're also trying to get rid of the heat. I will be getting rid of the veins and the seeds because I'm trying to get rid of the heat, especially for my children. It wouldn't bother me as much, but especially since I'm making this for my son's birthday, I'm trying to be a little bit more conscientious of his likes and dislikes. Now, if you have a couple of seeds staying there, don't worry about it. It happens. You'll see why it's not a big deal very shortly. I'm going to do this pretty much until I can somewhat fill up a small pot with these chiles. Then I will be covering it with water and putting them on to, these are dehydrated, so I want to rehydrate them. The other thing that I was going to mention is that you want these chiles to be as supple as you can. You want the darker ones if they have lots of spots that are like this per se. Let's see if you can see it real easy. That's discolored and whatnot. If there's a lot of those in the bag, I would highly recommend find a bag with the least amount of these type spots on the chiles, because that will take away from the flavor. You can feel somewhat sometimes through the plastic that you can move it around. You should be able to do this without it breaking. You want it to be supple like that because that's when it will have the best flavor. I've got my pot pretty filled. It's a medium-sized one compared to I've got the larger pot and then I've got a little teeny pot. It's probably got just like maybe 1 quart, so this is probably 2 to 3 quart pot, and it's mostly full with the Guajillo peppers. I'm gonna cover them up a little bit with the water, and then if you've seen any of my video for the salsa with the puya peppers, then you will know what I'm looking for. This water here, which of course, as you can see with my finger, it is absolutely clear, like typical, because it just came out the gallon jug. It should turn a good pink color, and then it will be ready. This meat is generally fully cooked through, but as you can see, there's quite a bit of that liquid, the juices from the meat. You want that to completely evaporate before you take the meat out of the pot. It's gonna take a little while longer, and yes, my patience is wearing thin because it's already getting late, but the meat definitely needs to be more tender, so I need to trust the process and leave it and let it take the time that it does. I'll be back momentarily. I'm gonna get ready and start making the salsa so that it's ready for as soon as this meat is ready to get out this pot. Look at that. Those chiles are definitely rehydrated. That water has turned a nice pink red color. That's exactly what you're looking for. So it's time to make this salsa. We're going to take these chiles and put them over here into this blender. Most salsas, you don't want much of that juice coming out of the water and getting into the blender because it's gonna dilute the flavor of whatever vegetables that you're gonna put in there. This one, it does not matter. You're gonna be adding quite a bit of that liquid, so it doesn't matter. Whoop. I'm just trying not to make a mess. Ha! And then I'm gonna give it a good splash of that. After this, any glass, preferably glass container that is circular, you're going to want to take that. This is cumin seed. You probably could use ground cumin. I always have learned with the cumin seed and this, anything else, I would have to tell you, you'd have to play it by ear, do it by flavor. I believe I've heard that ground cumin is much more strong, so you would want to be very careful on how much that you use. But with this cumin seed, I'm rolling this glass bottle over the cumin seed so that it can open it up just a teeny little bit and kind of, if you could call it, extract some of the oils. I'm not going to add all of this. I just prepared all of it for however much that might be needed. I'm only going to give, that would probably be about a half of a teaspoon maybe. I don't think that it would be a full teaspoon. Okay, I'm adding a teeny itsy bitsy little bit more. Next, salt. Then I'm going to put in a small little clove of garlic. I'll be honest with you, like I said at the beginning of the video, it's been quite a while since I've made this, so I really can't remember how much garlic I want to put in there, so I would rather err on the side of caution. I will let you know if there's any more that is needed, and we're going to blend this up. I have blended it up, but it obviously needed some more salt. I'm going to put a teeny bit more of this chili broth, if you could call it, in there. Just that way you're going to not be adding just straight water. You're adding something with the flavor of those chiles, so you're going to keep that true flavor. I'm also going to add just a teeny little bit more of the garlic. I'm not even going to add even that whole clove. You can see how that it is in comparison to my finger. I'm not even going to add all of that. I'm going to add probably, give or take, half of that clove. And then we'll see what it tastes like afterwards. It probably is going to need some more salt. I've added just a teeny little sliver more. But that's it. And we're going to blend this up and we'll be back in a minute. Of course, per typical, it needs a little bit more salt, which I'm not surprised. But the other thing that I'm remembering, and I just looked, and apparently I have run out of onions, so I would highly recommend to add a teeny little bit of onion, probably a small sliver, until you like the flavor. But since I'm out of onion, I'm going to add just a little bit of onion powder, since it's generally the exact same thing, just in powder form. So hopefully that'll be good, and I will check it out in just a moment. This salsa is done. I did have to add a little bit more garlic, which I believe I already showed y'all. I did also add a little bit more of that cumin. I've definitely added quite a bit of salt, and then of course I had added that onion powder because I unfortunately was unaware that I had run out of onion. So, but definitely you'll want that. It is ready to go. The steak, the juices are almost completely dried, so we're going to move that steak into another dish for a few minutes. We just gonna get this steak. We're gonna leave what few little juices that are in there as best as we can. We're gonna sit it over here to rest for a few minutes while we get that salsa in the frying pan. Definitely leave some of that juice there. Now that we have that steak out of the pot and it's resting, we're going to add the salsa in here. And I'm going to show you why it doesn't really matter if you have the seeds and whatnot in there. We're going to use a colander to get that salsa in there. Because any of that, the seeds and the veins and everything like that, they can create a less than desirable texture to that salsa. So just keep on letting it drain in there. Momentarily, I'm going to be using this spoon that I was using with the salsa. And that will help it kind of drain in there a little bit quicker. And then it will be a much smoother salsa. It may not make any difference to some people. It did not when I first started making this, because I did not notice the difference of texture until someone mentioned that I needed to. And then once I did, I could tell that there was a humongous difference in the texture. Of course, most of it is drained in here. Some of it is still at the bottom of the blender. So there we go with that. And if at any time you feel like it's still a bit thick or anything like that, which I will show you in just a minute, how that it can be a little bit thick once most of the liquid has dropped into the pot. It will be mostly just any kind of the fibrous parts, I guess you could call it, of the chiles. And you can see it's getting quite a bit thicker right there inside of that colander, which is one of the reasons that these mesh type colanders, they come in very handy. Any of the wire ones, they would be more likely to let some of this possibly pass through. So definitely get something that's got smaller holes so that it's not going to let all those pieces of your chiles get through. Now, of course, it's kind of a moot point. I'm getting ready to just lay that in there. It doesn't really matter because the stuff on the inside is going to stay on the inside. The other thing I was going to mention, over here, of course, I've got my, right here, I've got my blender vase. I'm going to just add a little bit of that water from the chiles, just a teeny little bit. And then you can see right there, it's just a teeny little bit. It's going to kind of just, I'm swishing it around what's in the bottom so that it can give it a little bit of extra moisture, but not enough to truly change the flavor of the salsa. And then I'm going to take that and pour that in here, and that can help as much of that salsa that is kind of sticking to the particles of the chiles is going to help that get through. Kind of loosen it up. And we're just about ready. We're going to wait until this heats up, starts to boil pretty good, and then we'll be able to add that meat back in there, and then it'll be pretty well done. Almost. Alright, and it looks pretty much over here like it's just about a paste rather than it being any liquid in there. And you can call it a day at that, or if you're like me, I'm way too OCD with this. I kind of rinsed off my spoon, and then I'm going to just scrape the outside, if you can see, scraping the outside of that colander so that I can get as much of that salsa in there as I can. It's not necessary maybe. It's probably maybe only, you know, a teaspoon or so of that salsa, but I'm like, hey, I worked hard for that. I'm going to totally get every last little drop that I can. So yes, you do you. If you don't want to, don't feel obligated. But that's me. And here we are. Look at that. That looks lovely. And you're just getting some of that steak flavors to get mixed in there. We're going to just let that keep on going for a couple of minutes, not for long. And then we're going to add back in that steak, and it'll be pretty well ready to go. That's looking pretty good to me. So we're going to go ahead and add back in this steak. Mixing it up. And forgive me, but that's beautiful. And then there's plenty of salsa for all of that meat. It's beautiful. I'm excited. And that can just stay there and just sit for a few minutes and just relax again. And I'll be making the tortillas, getting the beans fried up, and then it'll be time to eat. Now I get that this dinner is a little bit more involved. It's probably more expensive. It's a little bit more time consuming. So absolutely, if you want to do this at any time, make sure that it's on a day that you don't have as many time constraints. Make sure that, you know, you have a little bit more money available if need be. I know that it's not something that I do often. This is kind of a splurge, but it is 100% worth it. It is so good. I'm excited. My kids are going to enjoy it. This always gets served with fried beans, or as Americans call it, refried beans, and homemade tortillas. In my family, we always enjoy to add a little bit of sour cream. I just love the combination of the flavor. It's not necessarily needed. If you want to be lactose free, absolutely avoid the sour cream, but Otherwise, it is completely delicious. It doesn't have to be spicy. You can definitely enjoy it without the spice, and yum. I hope that my videos are encouraging. I hope that they're educational, that you like them, and hit the like button, that you'll subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification, so that hopefully maybe I'll be able to help you in some future with something maybe a little bit more simple, maybe a little bit more cost effective if need be, but definitely still delicious. Delicious is always the name of the game regardless. Otherwise, y'all have a delicious day.